Now that the shed was all closed in and essentially weather tight, I turned my attention to a ramp so that I could get my equipment inside. I used leftover lumber from the project and just sort of worked out the details in place as needed to give me what I wanted. I cut each angled joist in half so that I could make the ramp in 2 pieces and fold it. You'll see in a minute. I would have used pressure treated for the whole thing, but I didn't have enough on hand, and I didn't really want to buy more material. So instead I used a pressure treated 2x4 as kind of feet and cut it to fit underneath the regular dimensional lumber that I used for the bulk of the project. I just nailed those feet to the bottoms of the angled pieces that I built, and if someday I have to replace this whole thing, it's no big deal. I used leftover framing lumber, mostly 2x8 and 2x4, to create the driving surface on top of my ramp. Again, if this stuff doesn't last, then I'll just replace it with something else later, but with the pressure treated on the bearing surface on the ground, I don't see why this won't work just fine. I built my ramp in 2 pieces so that I can fold it on top of itself, save a little space because it extends right out into my driveway. Once I had the 2 pieces complete, I secured them together with 4 big hinges, one on each rafter location or whatever you want to call the supports. Built this ramp that folds because this is my driveway right here, and to have a reasonable ramp I wanted it to come out far enough but not be in the way all the time. So by folding it halfway, it takes up a lot less space. So this is real simple, just 4 hinges. I built the angled pieces in 1 piece and cut them in half, so that's real simple. So these are the windows that are going in. They don't have a nailing flange on the outside. It's flush. There's no brick mold or anything like that. They're actually sample windows. So they've got little carrying handles on them and some stand-up bases. So my first step is to remove those. Here I'm drilling a hole through from the inside, or a couple holes through, so that I know where to plunge my router in on the outside so I can cut out the plywood over these window openings. Afterwards, I nailed all around to make sure the siding was well secured around the new window openings. I screwed these 2x4s to the outside just so that the window has something to run up against so that I know when it's flush on the outside. Just one screw holding those on the outside. I measured how wide it needed to be to clear the raised part of the window in the center. So the flat part of the window should rest against those, and that'll let me install it so it'll be flush with the siding. Because my rough opening's a little larger, I also added this 3/4 inch piece on the bottom to close the gap a little, and that gave me an opportunity to shim it up so it was nice and level. Windows installed. They're replacement windows, which means they don't have any kind of outside flange. That big gap there will get covered with trim on the outside. I'll probably foam it on the inside just because. Just 4 screws, hold them in through the jambs. Pretty good for $30. I framed the west wall to include a door opening for a man door. So now my next step was to cut out the siding in the opening and install the door. I was glad to get that in the opening for the last time. That thing was heavy and awkward. Now for the big shop doors. I chose to build these right in place. Just seemed like the easiest way to get them to fit the opening properly and with the right gaps all around. So I started by tacking some thin plywood, it's like 3/16 inch, on the bottom, and then some little pieces around the sides and top, and that would act as a spacer. So when I actually laid out the framing lumber, it would give me just enough space around the edges. I secured these top and bottom plates for each door right to the framing with one screw in each piece. That held them tightly in place against the spacers that I had installed. One door at a time, I disassembled the pieces from the frame and then laid them out flat on the floor so that I could nail the 4 pieces together for each basic door frame. Next, I cut angled braces from the top corner to the bottom corner to keep the door from sagging. I marked the angles right in place so that I could make a cut on each end at the correct angle and the correct length. Much easier than trying to measure it and figure it out any other way. I lowered each door in turn and nailed those angle braces in place. I screwed this board all the way across the backs of both doors and then cut it at the seams, at the edges and in the center. And this would just ensure that the doors stayed at the correct width in the center when I took them down to finish off the framing. I laid out for interim studs, 16 inches on center, so that I could finish off the framing and then install the plywood sheathing on the outside. I find it easiest to just lay a stud over the whole thing and make the marks where it intersects the angled piece, and then cut it accordingly. Sure beats measuring. I'm using 10-footers because it's what I had on hand. I didn't have any more 8-foot studs. Now the sheathing. Before I laid the door down, I made some marks on the exterior so that I could ensure that the seams and the grooves in the T111 lined up with the siding on the outside of the building. A screw top and bottom to hold it in the right place. Second door, same as before. To get the grooves on the second door to line up with the sheathing on the outside, I had no choice but to use 2 pieces of T111 here. Even though one piece would cover the whole door, the grooves didn't line up correctly with the sheathing on the outside of the building. I installed 3 sets of hinges on each door. I started with these little 3/4 inch pine spacer blocks that would make sure the door had clearance once I'd installed the similar size trim around the outside of the door. I installed trim around the outside of the door opening, as well as on the doors themselves. And then I continued around the building and trimmed out the corner boards and the new windows on the backside. You can see here on the insides of the doors how I added some 2x4 blocking at the hinge locations to accept the screws. And I added similar blocking on the inside as needed to make sure those screws went into some good material and not just the siding. Next, I laid out these decorative X braces on the bottoms of the door. Just kind of a traditional look, spruce things up a little bit. I just held the pieces in place and made the marks as needed and a couple cuts here and there, trial and error, and I got the pieces all to fit. when you make corner boards, one piece has to be cut 3/4 of an inch shorter so that when you combine them at the corners, the visual width is the same on each side. Today is Friday, September 5th, 2025. And this shed is basically done on the exterior, except for paint. Got all the trim on, trimmed out these big doors, put some X bracing in the bottom for looks. It also is reminiscent of the shed next door. That'll all get painted later. Trim will be white, field color is under consideration. Got corner boards, all four corners. Just finishes that off nicely. Door trim is as it is, just that factory brick mold. Good enough. I need to build a step or steps, something. That's a big step right there. Window trim is on, corner boards in the back. These are just simple miters. Locks the windows in, presses them up pretty well, closes off the gaps. And the other back corner trim. And we're back around.